So, welcome back to the River Volta Podcast. I am Aliza Prodaniuk. I'm joined today by my co-host Ian and our guest Jessica Veeder.
Hello.
Hello, welcome. So, Jessica, or J.S. Veeder, received her bachelor's in creative writing and English literature at York University, and then a master's degree at the Center for Medieval Studies at the U of T. Having searched the Help Wanted section of the Globe and Mail for medievalist and finding nothing, she went back to writing, which is what she wanted to do anyway. Jessica writes science fiction and fantasy, short stories, and novels, and she has just completed a high-low sci-fi series for middle grade readers. Her stories have been published in Beneath Ceaseless Skies, Daily Science Fiction, and On Spec magazine, as well as in other venues. So, welcome. Do you want to start with some questions, Ian?
Well, I did have something to point out, which I really love in your bio. But the little bit of almost, I want to say snark, but not in a rude way, but in like, fine, this is what I'll do. I'll just write. That's what I want to do anyway. That was my favorite thing, and I had to point that out because I want to steal something like that for my bio.
Oh yeah, feel free. I think I might have stolen it from one of my fellow students when I was at U of T.
I think it's a very underrated thing for bios because bios are actually incredibly important for writers.
They're the hardest thing to write ever.
And they're so hard, but that's a good tip. I write a little bit of stark or personality, like throw a little sarcasm in there. I think that's a really good tip and it's memorable because I'm going to remember that.
Oh, I'm glad.
And usually I'm not going to remember anyone's bio, I don't think, or anything from anyone's bio. Generally.
Yeah, I often like that. You always get asked for a bio, and in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, who's reading these? But yeah. I'm well behaved. I do as I'm told. I'm Canadian, so I always write them. But yeah, I like to put something in that's maybe a little bit.
Well, different. I was because me and Aliza were talking about like literary journals and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was telling her the only two things that really, really matter, because I do a lot of editing for them, like first round reads. The two things that really only matter is your bio and the first paragraph.
Okay, don't tell me the bio is the only thing that matters.
Well, because that's the very first thing I'm going to read, right? Before anything, I'm going to read who you are, and then I'm going to read the first paragraph. And in that paragraph, I'm going to decide whether or not I think the story is good. Now, I'll continue reading, but I'll already have a conception. It's kind of like an interview, right? I'll have a conception of whether or not I think it's good. And it's very hard to break someone of that conception. If they already believe the story is not good, that like in that first paragraph, then it's going to be very hard to get out of that mindset. I mean, it's possible, but it's...
Yeah, I used to do slush pile reading. I've done it for a couple of different publications, and the first one, we had the author information in the bio. But again, I was more concerned, you say first paragraph, I would say first sentence, I'd have a good sense of whether or not I was going to.
Yeah, I was being generous.
As a writer, that's a horrible thing to know about slush pile readers, because when you're on the writing end of it, you spend hours on that first sentence. And then the second one I worked for, we didn't have, it was blind reading, which actually I preferred. So we didn't have any information about the author. Yeah. And then that first paragraph really mattered.
Yeah, and then it makes it even more important.
Yeah. And I found like recently, like the last year or so, a lot of publications, particularly for short stories and especially for flash fiction, they say, don't bother with the cover letter. Don't bother sending me your bio. We just want the story to stand on its own.
Yeah.
That's a little bit nerve-wracking.
Yeah, well, because it's helpful for as a reader doing like first readings of slush piles to know how much experience they have. It is helpful to know, but realistically, I will still judge you on that first sentence, and that's probably the most important thing.
Yeah,
oh yeah, well that's the thing. It's like if you think of like readers, right? Like that's exactly how they're going to judge you. They're opening a book and they're not going to read all the stories in it, right? Mm-hmm. Like say they're opening like a print magazine. They're gonna shuffle through because they don't really know anything. They don't have a bio or anything. They're just gonna shuffle through the short stories and they're gonna read the first sentence and they're gonna decide, do I want to continue reading this? That's how. That's the only way they're gonna read it. Nobody reads front to back literary magazines or science fiction magazines. They don't.
I think I must be in that small 1% that actually goes cover to cover.
Yeah, well,
back. But then I have a vested interest, right? So.
Yeah.
No, I hear what you're saying.
It's rare, but I do think that's how readers read. So that's how editors should edit at first. I mean, especially because it's a time thing more than anything.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think, Jessica, you're our first kind of foray into more of the genre fiction realm with the podcast, which is really exciting. I guess I should mention Jessica's actually a friend of mine, and we've been writing in the same group for a long time now.
It's been almost 2 years, I think, Aliza?
Yeah, and kind of met when I was just coming out of my undergrad and wanted to be a writer, and she's been Jessica's been a really big mentor for me, so sorry to make you blush.
Oh, no, it takes much more than that to make me blush.
Okay. But yeah, I guess just on that note, like being the first with the genre fiction, big question, I guess, is why science fiction? Why has this been the genre that you have gravitated towards?
I have no idea. I mean, my father loved science fiction, and growing up, the rabbit ears on our television every Wednesday night were pointed to channel 6, because at 6:00 on a Wednesday night was Star Trek reruns, and that's the only time we were allowed to watch television while eating dinner. So I think my dad probably got me into it. As far as television goes, it was my grandmother who introduced me to fantasy. I was at the cottage, and I think probably I was driving her crazy because it was a rainy day and I wasn't leaving her alone, and she pulled off a bookshelf this omnibus edition of the Lord of the Rings and dusted it off and gave it to me. And I didn't want to read it because it was big and heavy, but it was a book that had belonged to my uncle, and my uncle had died when I was 2, so I never knew him. So I was sort of fascinated by the fact that I had this artifact that had belonged to him, and it was raining and there was nothing to do. And it took me the entire summer to read that book, and it changed my life. Like, I had no idea that books like that existed that could sort of transport you to this entirely different world. And at that point, I sort of thought, oh, this is the point. Like, I didn't get, like, reading, who cared? I didn't care. And but I read that book and I realized what books could do, and then I wanted to be able to do that as well. So I wrote fantasy for the longest time. But it wasn't, when I was writing science fiction and fantasy, it was not the thing to write when you were at a Canadian university taking creative writing. Like, I know the York program has changed since then, but when I was there, every time I present something to my class or to a workshop that was science fiction or fantasy, the overall opinion was, yeah, this is nice, but could you write something different? And I tried, but I didn't get the same sense of pleasure and joy and excitement out of writing stuff that took place in the here and now as I did when I was writing science fiction or fantasy. But I had a teacher when I was in grade 12 or 13 asked me, why does your mind work in this fantastic way? And I have no idea. But yeah, ask me to put a story in the here and now, I draw a blank. But throw an alien in, or say, this romance takes place on a moon orbiting Jupiter, I'm like, okay, yeah, I can write that. But yeah, I don't know.
Jessica,
I'm glad it does.
I often write some science fiction, and I often write really absurd stories.
Good.
And so I find they feel similar.
Yes.
And so I had a friend ask me once, what's the difference between like a magical realism or like absurdity or surreal stories and science fiction? Like, what's the difference that makes you can write absurd, almost science fiction-y stories?
Yeah, I have written absurd science fiction. I've had students ask me, how do you define science? How is science fiction defined? Because it is pretty broad. The one that I landed on that seemed the easiest smart answer I could give was that a science fiction story, if you remove the technological element of the story and the story still works, then it's probably not real science fiction. But I don't even think that that's the way I write. Like, a lot of the stories that I write could take place in the here and now,
right? And
they would still work because they're more stories about people than they are about the technology.
Going to hesitate on that definition. I was thinking it was more, and this is my making it up. I have no idea if this is right.
No, I'm curious what you think.
I thought that the difference really was, so an absurd or surreal story is magic with no explanation. Science fiction is magic with a science explanation.
That's interesting. Yeah, that's interesting.
Right? And one tries to explain it, one doesn't try to explain it.
Yeah.
Because you can have present day science fiction. I think.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I find science fiction particularly forgiving in the breadth that's allowed. Like, you could take any genre and put it into a science fiction context, and I think it would still work. Like whether it's a ghost story or a romance or a memoir. Well, memoir might be stretching it a little bit. Creative nonfiction, whatever.
Yeah.
But no.
Science fiction memoir. That sounds like a very tough genre to create.
I think I did when I was about grade 11 or 12. We had, the usual, myself in the year 2020. Although back in the day it was myself in the year 2000. So that's like that was my sci-fi memoir.
Me and Aliza, ironically, just talked to someone who wrote a memoir. That was our last podcast. And one of the questions I had, which is almost on the subject of science fiction memoir, was how much of it is fictionalized? How much do you know is fictionalized, and how much do you not, do you think you don't know that you're fictionalizing and you're not even aware of, right? And she had a really good point how say if I'm writing like a sunset, right? I don't remember that sunset. I just remember what sunsets are like, and I just know there was a sunset. So I'm going to fictionalize what it was like, which is very interesting. So you can almost, I think, cross those boundaries a little bit. Yeah,
absolutely.
I have no idea how you would, but
yeah, but it'd be fun experimenting with it, though, right?
Yeah, it's almost like you would add flavoring. You'd add some science fiction flavoring to your memoir life.
Yeah, I mean, I had a telescope growing up. I still have one. I mean, my everyday life is pretty science fiction-y anyway because of that.
I mean, yeah, I guess it would just be like your life, but you're adding fictional elements to it.
Mm-hmm.
But you could still be true to your life in a sense.
Yeah.
Kind of like Tim O'Brien's. A lot
more interesting than my actual life.
Yeah. Well, I think that's why you write.
Yeah.
You write to make something happen.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Yeah.
And you self-publish everything so far?
I've self-published my novels. I traditionally publish my short stories.
Okay. I'm the same way, just because that way makes sense.
It made sense to me. Like I could have completely self-published everything. And I do intend at some point, I've got a bunch of my short stories that I'm, currently shopping around. My plan is down the road, because they also take place in the same universe. My plan down the road is to put them together into an anthology chronologically and to sort of tell that story of that universe. But I would like to get them traditionally published first. It's a good way of finding new readers. Right. It's also really, really good experience in professionalism and learning how to be a professional writer, dealing with rejection when it comes, like a grown-up, and accepting feedback when it comes from people you don't know. I think is really, really important to my growth as a writer. And I've learned. I sold my first story, I think 10 years ago, 11 years ago now, and the amount of stuff I've learned as a writer since then has been extraordinary. Thanks to having really good editors who are not afraid, thank goodness, to tell me like it is. But as far as self-publishing my own novels, my reason for doing that was pretty much I wanted to learn how to do it. And I wanted to learn how do you do a book interior to make it as professional as possible? And how do you go through all the process? When is a novel actually finished and ready to be published, rather than when is it too soon? So, and ditto, I published my first novel. I think it's been 10 years now for that too. And I look back at that as I think all writers do, and shudder in horror, because I made so many mistakes. But if I had not made those mistakes, I wouldn't have learned from them, right?
Yep.
So the stuff I'm putting out now is, I think, a lot stronger than, I hope it's a lot stronger than what I was doing 11 years ago, self-publishing wise. But it's been a really good experience too.
If you were going to give advice to somebody self-publishing, like just one piece of advice, what would you give if they want to self-publish a novel?
Hire an editor.
Hire an editor. That's a really good one that I have, spoiler alert, I have a self-published novel as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I did not hire an editor. And that's definitely something I should have done. I hired a proofreader. A little bit different.
Good. That's a start. That counts.
Yeah. Mostly because I just was like over it. So like, because you said a good thing. When you self-publish a novel, you have to decide yourself when it's done.
Yeah.
And I decided I was sick of it. Like I was just over it. And I just and I spent like 2.5 years on it. So I was like, I just wanted people to read it. I've been talking about it forever. So I'm just going to put it out onto Amazon.
Yeah. No, but even hiring a proofreader, hiring an editor is not cheap.
Yeah.
I do editing work for friends, and I also don't want to offer my services cheaply because it takes me a lot of time, and it's the professionalism thing, right? My first book, I did not hire an editor, thinking that, oh, I'm well educated, I can do this myself, and to a certain extent I can, but you get too close to it, you can't see it anymore.
Yeah.
And I had stupid little mistakes that I made. That just irritate me, but
That's
but yeah, definitely hire an editor.
Steven Pinker has that idea that all writers suffer from, the curse of knowledge. You know what your story is,
Yes.
and you don't, but you don't know what somebody who doesn't know.
Yeah.
And you don't know where the gaps are in what they know and what you know.
Mm-hmm,
you know.
Yeah, well, that's what I find so valuable about the critique group that I'm in, because I do know my stories really well, and it's actually interesting. There's a woman in our critique group who doesn't read science fiction, and initially I had thought that might be a problem, like that might not work in my favor because she doesn't understand the genre. So there's a lot of short forms in the genre. There's a lot of language that you use in the genre that people who read it will understand, but if you don't read it, they don't understand it.
Right.
But having this person say, "What the heck is this?" or "I don't understand this," it's been really good, because then I'm able to look at it and say, okay, well, is this a case of a sci-fi shorthand that she doesn't know, or am I actually deliberately confusing my reader?
Well, that also makes me think of how you got into your writing career, or like your reading career with Lord of the Rings. You were not a reader of fantasy, right? But you were a young reader who so she would be perfect for that little girl, right? Because someone who doesn't know the tropes, you want it to appeal to that person too, who they fall in love with, right?
Yeah.
Aliza, what has been the biggest thing for you in a reader group?
I'm sorry, I'm just laughing because I know we're in the same group, so but it's interesting because like I think I come from I love fantasy as a kid. I'm a big Lord of the Rings fan as well, so I came from more of like the fantasy background in my reading, but I was not a reader of science fiction really. So I wonder if Jessica has found the same thing with my kind of commentary, which is interesting. But I think I don't know. I don't know what I think about that.
How many people are in there on your guys' reading group?
6 of us.
Is it a reading group, editing group? What's it called?
Writing critique group.
Critique group.
Yeah. So
I think that's why I forgot the word, because I haven't heard the word to describe a writing group, critique group.
And normally it'd be like a writing workshop, but I don't know why we started calling it a critique group.
It's like an elevated word. You just elevated it.
Trying to be posh.
Well, our group has gone, I think, through like many forms. I guess we had several different members, lots of different locations. I mean, even through COVID, we've been through like Zoom, or when we've been able to, meeting in the park, or for a while we were in my parking garage. So yeah.
Oh.
It's almost time to move back to the parking garage, Aliza. And at one point we had about 11 people in it, and I capped it. I was the official organizer at the time. I capped it because it was just too many. But we sort of sit like 5 and 6 now. I'd go up to 8, but I wouldn't want to go more than 8 because you don't have time to. You really need to take time to look at someone's work and really give it a lot of thought, and the discussion I find is really actually more valuable than the comments I get on my work that I get back from individual people. I find the discussion amazing. Yeah, it's a fantastic group. It's I've been in critique groups and in workshops probably since I was in high school, and this has been one of I think probably the best I've been in.
I've never been in one. I've had like individuals where we would share work, like almost like one-on-one critique groups.
Yeah.
But I've never been in one, and I've looked into it, and I don't know what's really stopped me. Maybe just being a coward. I don't know. Like, you know what I mean? Like getting feedback from people you don't know freaks me out a little bit.
Yeah, but you published a book there, my dear.
Yeah, that's
Talk
true.
about getting feedback from people you don't know.
Oh yeah, and so far I've got only one negative review out of about 40, but it really hurt.
Oh yeah.
Even though it looked like a troll one, it was a Amazon review that just said trite, short. Or trite. I can't remember what the other words. I just remember it said trite. It was like 3 words, 1 star. And I was like, okay, well, it didn't hurt as much because it didn't seem like they didn't give enough detail.
It wasn't personal enough.
Yeah. You don't believe anything. As good writers know, you don't believe anything if there's not enough detail.
Yeah, true.
All right.
Yeah,
well,
yeah, I if you're a writer, I think it's really good to be in a workshop or be involved in a critique group, but the caveat is you need to find your people.
Right.
And your people aren't going to be in every single group that you walk into, either because they are not writing what you write or they don't understand what you write. And sometimes people don't understand what you write because it's just impossible. It's just bad writing and that, you screwed up. But sometimes, I often say that not all books are for all people. And so you have to find a group who gets you. And this group that Aliza are in, I'm blessed because they get me, and they know what I'm trying to do, and they also know me well enough to know that I've got thick skin, and I really do want constructive criticism. I don't want someone going, "Oh, it's lovely, dear," like my mother. I love her, but no, Mom, it's not always lovely. Sometimes it's garbage, and I need to be told it's garbage. And I really want to hear that. I mean, I don't want to hear it, but I need to hear it, right?
Yeah, I think we're all pretty honest with each other, which has been very valuable.
Brutally so.
Well, that is one I found with school workshops, which I think is better in an MFA program that we're in, that we're starting to get to know each other better. But say if you take a workshop and you don't really know each other, it's very hard to feel like you're getting honest feedback, or to like maybe you are, but it's hard to know if you are, because you're like are they they don't want to say the real thing, or are they like, it's hard to know what you're getting. It's true. But if you get to know somebody over time, I think it's much easier to know the person and know the kind of feedback they're giving and how they even word their feedback and what that means.
Yeah. And also, as the person giving the feedback, it helps to be more familiar with that person's writing. One of the women in our group, I've been reading her stuff probably for about 8 years now, or 9 years, and I know what she's trying to do. I know who her chosen audience is, and I have a good sense of where she's trying to go, even before I've even read a piece. Like, I'll read the first few lines, I go, oh, okay, yeah, I see where this is going. It's because I know her so well. And we work really well together because she knows what I'm trying to do in my work, and I know what she's trying to do in hers, and we can help each other get there.
Yeah.
When you start reading somebody for the first time, you don't, I mean, it's good sometimes to have that kind of a blind read, because that sort of honest first impression feedback can be really valuable.
Yeah.
As we were talking about, like when you're subbing stuff into editors, it's good to know what someone thinks about your stuff. But when you're sort of trying to get down to the nuts and bolts of pulling a story out of something, it's really nice to have someone who has a good sense of who you are as a writer, I find.
Well, I think that's a really interesting comment, because one thing I've always noticed is, so if someone has something interesting in their, like they've done something interesting or they have an interesting idea in their short story or work or whatever, that's what people pick apart. And some people pick it apart positively, and some people pick it apart negatively, right? But some people focus on it. And so if you don't know their writing or their style, what they're trying to do, it can sometimes probably lead people in the wrong way. If you don't know, like, because like,
I understand.
You want to heighten what they're trying to do. Like you want to rewrite the story that they're trying to write. You don't want to change what they're trying to do, right?
You're trying to, it's that diamond in the rough, right? You're trying to help them polish that diamond rather than just chipping it apart because you can't see that it's a diamond anyway.
Yeah. Or you're just handing them a diamond.
Yeah. I wouldn't mind being handed a diamond.
Yeah,
here.
it'd be nice.
It's all done. You don't have to do a thing. Go win an Aurora Award.
Well, Aliza, was there anything else you wanted to talk about? It is interesting because you know her well. So I'm asking you guys questions, or her questions of like you already know the answers to. But
yeah, no, why don't we move into the reading, and then we can have some discussion about the piece afterwards.
All right.
Alrighty. I have to caution, I haven't actually, I read this morning because I told Aliza what I wanted to read. And then I thought, oh my gosh, when did I actually last read this thing? So I pulled it out this morning and read it. And I was like, that's not bad. I wonder who wrote this.
I like that feeling. I always find the further distance I have from something, the less I like it. And then I read it again. I go, okay, no, it's not that bad.
Yeah. Except I'm editing it as I'm reading it, right? It's already been published and edited. And I was editing it again as I was reading it.
Oh, no.
Well, you know what? We'll ask you right at the end, after you're done, what you noticed this reading that you want to change. We'll ask you.
Oh, okay. I've got a list about 40 things long.
I'm always curious because I can tell people self-edit while they're reading. They'll change words and stuff. So I'm always curious what they noticed when they read it out loud.
Okay. Well, yeah. Okay. Well, yeah. I'll keep that in mind.
You can jump right into that because it also is always a little awkward for about a second after they finish reading. So.
And they go, oh, I can't believe I just read that. Oh my gosh, why did I pick this piece? Okay, so this actually, I was thrilled to publish this in On Spec magazine. It was in number 110, volume 29, numbers 3 and 4. It was a very exciting sale for me. And it's called Ice Singer. Even face down, Solly felt the silent mass of Jupiter overhead. Its weight was a blanket, comfort against the cold, dark night of space. Her faceplate, its transparency dialed up as far as it would go, was pressed against the surface of the moon. Still, she could hear it. After all this time, Solly thought she could probably hear it in her sleep. There was a crunch of ice from nearby. The atmosphere of Europa was thin, but sound could travel, and the ice was a good soundboard. "You sent me to check on you," said Mika. Solly didn't move. "I'm fine," she said. "You haven't moved in 90 minutes. Solly raised one arm and waved in the direction of the drill platform. "Okay?" Mika laughed. "Yeah, that'll do it. Anything yet?" "Wait for it," Solly said. Mika crunched away, leaving Solly prostrate on the ice. This was her third trip to Europa. This time it had felt like coming home. The rough ice plains which had seemed so bleak and exposed under the foreign sky now welcomed her. She loved this place. She loved the way the ice reflected the orange bands of Jupiter. She loved the sound the feeble wind made as it curled around the Enviro hut at night. She loved the groans of the shifting ice. And the fact that the last of her family's fortune had gone into this venture, worth every coin. Solly bent her concentration on the moon beneath her. There were the usual reports as Europa stretched and gasped in the grips of 3 competing gravity wells. These were background noises, and although they were music to her, they were not what she had come for. 3 breaths. 4. The air in the suit smelled of plastic and disinfectant and her own animal scent. She shut out everything but what she could hear. Her breath, the low hum of the fans that kept her alive, and, beneath her, the ice. There it was. A deep moan, a sliding, shifting, as if a great dark body rubbed itself against the underside of the ice. She held her breath. On the count of 6, as always, whatever it was that lived under the brittle surface began to sing. She chinned her calm. "We're a go," she said, getting to her feet. 200 meters away, centered in the mitten-shaped chaos bulge, Pharrell's drill platform waited. Suspended over the open hole hung the glassy sheened bathysphere. Solly had spent the last 4 years building. Bathysphere was an old word, and an inaccurate description for the high-tech peak submarine, but the shape and intention were the same, to allow one half-mad woman to descend into the depths of Europa's fabled ocean to see what was to be seen. The narrow hatch of the sphere stood open. Solly slid in, Europa's slight gravity allowing her an agility she no longer had on Mars. Mika closed the hatch behind her. Solly pulled herself into the loose crouch she would maintain for her dive, the space around her comfortable and familiar. She plugged her suit into the sphere's environment controls. "Ready," she said. "Ready," Pharrell said. He disengaged the lock on the motor holding the cable. Solly began her descent. The lip of the well rose above her, its sides smooth and shiny from the laser drill's work. Mika's GPR indicated that the brittle surface ice of Europa was, at most, 500 meters thick. Below it, a submerged lake waited, and below that, Solly hoped, at last, to make contact with the creature whose song she'd first heard 10 years before. The fact that no one believed her was beside the point. 200 meters, Pharrell said. "Looking good." Solly settled into the comforting red glow of the interior, enjoying the warmth of the sphere after the cold of the surface. She watched her reflection in the mirror-like glass of the sphere and wondered what the singer on the ice would make of her. Knowing it was completely unscientific, Solly had speculated what kind of creature she would find. She imagined it in a kind of constant migration as it followed Jupiter's tides. In spite of herself, she thought it a whale, the kind which had long been extinct on Earth. She imagined a powerful, blunt head capable of pushing aside the punky ice. She imagined a mouth of sorts, straining the ice for morsels of organic matter. There was a small rocking in the smooth rhythm of her descent. Solly marked it, checked her readings, decided it was nothing. A hiccup in Pharrell's engine, perhaps. 400 meters. She chafed at the slow descent, but a fall here was just as deadly as a fall on Mars. 50 meters, Farrell said, tracking her from the surface. 40, 30. Solly powered up her engine, tested the small prop one last time. Contact. She felt nothing, but then the sphere was buoyed up ever so slightly, and the depth readings showed her descent had slowed. Slush, she confirmed. Visibility was 0, but sonar told her what they'd known. The lake, well only a kilometer deep, was as wide as Solus Planum, 1,800 kilometers. She looked for the large vent they'd chosen from orbit. I see it, she said, disconnecting. She gave the computer the command to let the cable go. There was a shudder bigger than she'd expected and a metallic clang as the cable released. Good sailing, Mika said casually, her voice belying the truth that no one had ever done anything like this before. Pundits on Mars called Solly mad. They were probably right. She fell, small touches to the prop controls keeping her aligned. She turned the speakers on, and all at once the sphere was filled with the sounds of the slush, the occasional scrape of ice as it slid by her hull, and the deep, sonorous rumblings of the moon. And there, the song. Version D, she said for the log. The 4th song she'd identified, though her professors and colleagues had laughed at her. She liked to think it was louder here in her little bubble of a ship than it had been on the surface. She thought the moon-wide lattice of ice must vibrate when the singers sang together, ringing Europa as if it were a bell. There was a burp of movement and the sphere's pitch changed, abruptly, rolling back with a protest from the ballast tanks. What was that? Farrell asked, her progress displayed on the computer screen on the drill platform. Nothing serious, Solly said, her hands still steady on the controls. She'd waited too long for this opportunity to let a tiny hiccup stop her. The temperature outside the sphere had spiked, then subsided. Was it her imagination, or had the song just changed? She had a sudden feeling that she was running late. She flipped a switch, flooding the topmost swim bladder. She fell faster. Okay, Mika said. Yep, she said, getting tired of hanging around. She dropped and adjusted her yaw. Sonar bounced off the solid ice beneath her, except for the vast gaping maw of the vent, a blank hole of nothing. She slid into it like she was being swallowed. Then warnings from the computer and the temperature spiked, and the sphere was tossed. Solly was thrown to one side, her hands ripped from the controls. The sphere was lifted 60 or 70 meters and then dropped again like a stone, tumbling down through the vent while she tried to right her tiny craft. Then stillness, with no sound but Solly's gasping breath, the whir of her life support, and the steady music of the song. And still she fell. She checked her readings. Depth, 12 kilometers. The slush around her had changed, the pressure turning it into a reluctant liquid. She flicked on the external lights. Her mirror self vanished, replaced by a deep purple-black swarm with motes that reflected her light back at her. The temperature in the vent continued to rise. Solly! Just getting tossed around a bit, Mika. There. Something went past, barely a flash, a fold in the darkness before it was gone. And still she fell, though slower now, as if her small ship were unwelcome. She flooded the last 2 bladders. Listen to this, she told the world above, and opened the channel so the song flowed up into Europa's thin atmosphere. We're getting some strange readings, Mika said. Then she was through, and the vent disappeared above her. Sonar pinged off nothing for hundreds of kilometers of the vast, unknowable ocean of Europa. We've got temperature readings off the scale, Mika said, her voice tense. Orbital Lab has issued a plume warning. You need to get out of there. Solly's fingers worked the computer interface. The surrounding temperature was much higher than it should have been. Pressure was building. Her little sphere bobbed bravely on the surface. She didn't have much time before the plume blew with the force of a volcano. But the song continued. She felt its vibrations against the sphere, against her suit, against her skin, and she'd seen something. Acknowledge, she told the others. She engaged the prop, and instead of returning to the vent and to the surface, she followed the temperature spike to where it was highest. In other oceans she had studied, life congregated in the depths where fire met water. You're off course. Are you receiving the locator beacon? Loud and clear, she said. And there, the fold in the dark. The deep, sinewy movement she'd imagined while lying on the ice. Now the sphere resonated with the song, and the song changed, taking on a tone she'd not heard before. She spared a glance at her instruments to make sure she was recording. She checked the sonar, and there it was, a shadow several tens of meters across, curled and massed where the temperatures were greatest. Solly whispered what she saw into the radio, repeating over and over, "I can see it! I can see it!" She piloted the craft ever so slowly, her eyes wide and mouth open. Finally, it had taken her years. The sphere bucked, wobbled. She righted it. There was a scatter of movement. Solly froze. It had seen her. She'd frightened it off, but another glance at the sonar and she laughed out loud. Not it. Them. Where she had seen one, there were actually many. Not one tens of meters across, but many of them, averaging 2 meters or less. The sphere slid to one side, rose, dropped. She corrected and checked the sonar. Gone. All of them, except... There. Solly approached. This one was the singer. This close, its song was clear, slow, and stately. Her lights gleamed off it, strangely warped and distended to her eyes as well as to the sonar. Then the computer screamed a warning at her. Disbelief at what she saw made her laugh out loud. Her searchlight bounced off the crystalline lattice of an ice ship before her. The singer was curled within the ship, eyeless head facing the vent. Solly, all at once, understood. What better way to escape the iced-over confines of Europa's ocean? The singer intended to use the plume as a launch window. Solly rapid-fired this information into the mic, swinging her little craft away, but too late. The pressure, building for long, cold centuries and heating this bubble under the ice, finally blew. The roar filled her ears and sent her sphere tumbling. The plume sucked her upwards and fired her through the vent in a spray of ice and snow. It might have thrown her clear had there not been a second ship ahead of her, another diver who rode the plume and fired its small vessel up and out of the world it knew. Solly would have liked to see the singer go, see it arc into the moon's thin atmosphere, its trajectory like a flung stone. Solly would have liked to hear its song of discovery, but she fell back, tumbling gently now, and the shattered ice settled slowly, so slowly, back to the surface of Europa. The end.
That was great. Thank you, Jessica.
You're welcome. I had fun writing that.
Yeah, I know. I always one thing I always enjoy in your writing, and especially in this piece, is kind of like your world building and those just details that you have that really just paint these worlds as like somewhere real. Just like the way the orange, like the ice reflected the orange bands of Jupiter. She loved the sound of the feeble wind as it curled around the viral hut at night. The groans of the shifting ice. Those for me are really what make these stories come alive. And I wonder if you could speak a bit to your world building. Like, where do these ideas come from for these worlds, and how do you kind of materialize them?
This one I actually know where it came from. A lot of times I'd say I don't really know where things come from, but this one I do know, and it came from a documentary I was watching about Antarctica. And there were a group of scientists, and they were wearing those red, big puffy snowsuits, but they were lying on the ice, and they were listening because they could hear the seals hunting underneath the ice, and that's where I got it from. So, yeah, a group of people in Antarctica published a documentary, and I was like, wouldn't it be cool if that happened on? Well, then you have to pick a place where that story can happen. And there was a lot of research into Europa, which is fascinating, really, really interesting. And so throw Europa and Antarctica and seals together, and you get a spacefaring worm or whatever he is.
What did you notice that you want to change?
If I knew I was going to be reading it out loud, I would not have named her Solly. So many S's. It's very sibilant. Actually, that was not too bad. I had my editor on that was Barb Gaylor Smith, and she was really, really good. She really reined me in and took out a lot of unnecessary things. Like, the line, "You kill your babies." She made me kill a lot of babies. And I think there was only one that I actually insisted on holding on to, and I just sort of switched it around so that she was happy. I think at one point I used the word kind 3 times in 2 sentences. So that was the only thing that stuck out to me.
Yeah. Little things.
But it's a good exercise reading out loud. Like, you're always told to read out loud, but you don't do it because, it takes time, but it's a good exercise doing it.
why did you choose this short story to read?
I like the work I do that I'm most proud of is sci-fi with sort of a literary feel to it. And I really like Solly, and I really hope she survived that horrible accident that she was in, but I don't know if she did. I really like her. I like the idea of an explorer who says, that I feel strongly about this and I'm going to just do it. And she's being laughed at and she might be wrong, but she's still, she's not going to rest until she gets the answer. And even if she doesn't survive this encounter, at least she knows that she wasn't crazy.
Right. You made a really interesting choice in two ways. One, you don't really describe the sound. You do a little bit. I think you said like stately is one word you used, but you don't like describe. Those are more like ambiguous terms, right? You don't actually describe the sound, and then you don't describe what they look like.
No.
Why do you think you made those two choices? Ambiguity.
I like there to be space for the reader to put themselves into it. I tend not to describe my characters particularly unless there is something in the description of the character that is necessary to understand who they are or why they're responding to certain situations. I prefer to have space in there for the reader to bring themselves to it. If anything I wrote was ever chosen to be turned into a television or a movie, I would like everyone to be angry about the actor or actress who was chosen to play a role, because everybody would say, no, that's not who Solly looks like. But nobody knows. I mean, Solly looks like whoever, you decide she looks like.
I do wonder. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry.
Aliza.
No, I think your question was interesting though, Ian, because when I read it and then hearing Jessica read it again, for me, like the sounds and the image of the ice singer were really clear to me, especially in the line. Just all I needed was that line about the whale. Maybe it's like an extinct whale on Earth, and instantly I kind of got that kind of noise, as well as I kind of actually imagined them as seal kind of shaped creatures. So it's interesting now knowing that it was kind of based on an Arctic exploration. So, but no, I think it's interesting what you are to imagine as the reader.
Because it's interesting, that you do put in what Solly imagines they are before she's ever sees them, which she imagines they're whales. Mm-hmm. But you don't put what they actually are. And so I think it's an interesting choice, because it's almost like with both those things, there's this idea of like, I think Borges wrote, I can't remember the title, but about the greatest novel ever written. But you can't actually write the greatest novel ever written. You got to write about the greatest novel ever written, because you're not going to be able to do it, right? So it's almost like it's more powerful to let someone else think about what the sound could be, rather than trying to explain a sound. Or like the magic of an alien who's singing is almost more powerful to leave it ambiguous and let someone else, put the reader imagine what it would actually be like. It's almost like you're going to lose some power by explaining it.
Yeah, and I find that in some other things that I read, I don't want to offend anybody. It happens more. I find it happens more often in writers who are learning how to write and still learning the craft. That yes, when you're describing something, you need to choose a concrete, specific detail. Like pick a really good, concrete, unique, specific detail to tell us about it. But I find that sometimes writers will give me 15 or 20 concrete, specific details. And that it has the opposite effect, that rather than drawing me in, it actually takes me away, because I want some space for my own imagination to work. Mm-hmm. And there's that space between where the writer is telling the story and my own imagination is engaging in it. And that for me is when a story comes alive. Yeah,
you almost want to use both halves, right? Like you want to use the reader as a tool to do a lot of the work. You want to signal ideas and signal things that they could imagine, and then let them fill in the gaps. And it's actually more powerful if they do the work.
I think so.
But you need to give them something to hold on to usually.
Yeah. Well, if you don't give them enough, they're like, I don't know what I'm doing here. So there's a very fine line between doing too much and not doing enough. And Yeah, that's what your critique group is for, because they will tell you if you haven't done enough.
Well, I was going to say, yeah, it's also very hard to know that line. It's very hard, and it takes a long time to feel like you know the line. But often, yeah, you like you said, you'll have someone tell you, well, no, you don't. You missed a line.
Yeah. But that's why, I guess I teach writing workshops, and invariably each session I teach, someone says, well, how do you become a good writer? And my answer is always read voraciously.
Yeah.
And when you come across something, and it could just be a sentence in a novel, that sometimes you get those sentences and it just hits you. And you're la la la, and then you read the sentence and your heart rate spikes and your blood pressure goes up because, oh my gosh, something horrible is going to happen. And then I think, how did that author do that with one sentence? Like, what did they do? And then I have to go back and sort of break it down. Like, how did they do that? And that's why it's important to read as a writer.
Yeah,
I've never met a writer who said I don't read, but if I ever met a writer who said they didn't read, I'd be very suspicious.
Yeah, there's Stephen King's line that sticks with me for a long time, or forever so far, is that if you don't have time to read, you don't have time to write.
Yeah.
It's just like very basic. If you're not a reader, you're not a writer, and that's just all there is.
Yeah, and I think I get what he's saying. I think you can also extend it to just sort of absorbing stories.
Mm-hmm.
I do enjoy watching television. I enjoy really well told stories, and I would never, there's a real difference between watching a program on the television and reading a story. And I think reading is most important, but some storytelling on television is so good. And you can go at it with that same sort of analysis. Like, why does this story work so well? Why am I so engaged with these characters? Why do I care so much? And sometimes it's easier to figure it out when you're watching a television program, and then to take what you learn from that and apply it to your own writing, I think is also valuable.
Yeah, I think there's another thing where it's like, as a writer, you have to kind of take the whole world and be always learning.
Yeah,
because that's really your playground, right? Is life.
Yeah.
So it's everything. And like from TV and movies, you get really good. One dialogue is really good, I think, to take from, because it works the same way. And then the other thing is, plot.
Yes.
Plot's really good. Because do you find novels are more comparable to movies, or do you think short stories are more comparable to movies?
I don't know that I feel comfortable comparing them because they all work so differently. If you're watching a series, okay, this is like my son and I are watching Smallville together right now, and we're in like season 4 or something, and it's actually starting to get really interesting. The plot building is getting really interesting. I mean, it takes some ridiculous turns, which is why we watch it, and it's so much fun. But I do find myself taking notes, especially when they've got a story thread that's going over more than 1 or 2 episodes, and they carry it through 5 or 6 episodes. And they had started recently a little, it would be like reading a single sentence in a novel. There's this weird thing that stuck out. And I remember at the time I saw, what are they doing here? And then they dropped it. This theme got dropped. And then it came up like 3 episodes later, and I'd forgotten about it. But when I saw it the second time, I was like, oh my God, I saw that 3 episodes ago. Well, now I know for sure it's significant. And that's an interesting lesson. Like in our critique group, we'll talk about the importance of foreshadowing if something's going to happen. Like the whole thing, if you see a gun in scene 2, it must be fired by scene 6, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And those are really good lessons that television teaches really well, because they're visual and they're really so obvious, but they need to be done in novels too. So yeah, whether or not they're comparable to short stories or novels, I think it would depend on whether you're, I don't know, watching Lord of the Rings or watching Smallville or Doctor Who, like.
Yeah, I think it probably does change.
Mm-hmm.
It changes. Like series or science fiction or fantasy seem much more comparable to television series.
Yeah, they lend themselves really well to that too. I think if they're treated with respect. I think
it's because the world building is so big, so you kind of have to tease it out over a series of episodes, right?
Mm-hmm. And also too with science fiction and fantasy being a much more, like when I was, in my teens, there was not a whole heck of a lot of science fiction on television, and what was on there was, great fun, but really campy and not taking itself very seriously. But now it seems you get some really, really good fantasy and sci-fi stuff on television or in the movie theater, and they are they're beautifully, and they're treated like serious works of art rather than just something campy. And I'm so grateful for that. I feel so vindicated.
Yeah, Game of Thrones probably did a lot.
Which I confess, I only watched the first season, but having read all the books, I just couldn't bring myself to watch the rest. So I knew it was coming.
Yeah, well, I mean, you're in a hard place though, because now you never know how it's going to end.
Yeah, I don't know. I think I'll just make it up as I go, right?
Yeah, well, George R. R. Martin did post on January that he's close. He did some update that he thinks this year, but he's done that a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I think I feel for them. I do feel for him. How do you finish writing your series when it's already been written?
Well, the nice thing is it's been done poorly.
Yeah.
So,
maybe that was.
But I don't know if that scares him because it got so much backlash, right? So it might scare him that like, oh, if I mess this up.
Yeah. What an interesting place to be in, though, for him. Yeah, like yeah, a lot of respect. I mean, amazing world builder. I mean, extraordinary books. I love them.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything I consumed more than that. So like when I read them, would have been like 14 years ago. So Dance of Dragons was not out yet.
Yeah.
So just the first 4 are out. I think I waited about 5 years only for Dance of Dragons, which is much better than most people.
Yeah.
But I read all 4, which are like 1,500 page tomes.
Yeah, I've got them on my bookshelf.
In about 3.5 weeks, though.
Yeah.
So all I did was read all day for about 3.5 weeks, just pure reading. That's all I did.
Yeah, and he would do these, like, we were talking about like details and what you put details in, and like, do you describe the whale creature or not? He had one detail, and it might have been in Dance of Dragons, but I'm not sure. And it's Circe, and she's on her own, and she's contemplating killing everybody or whatever it is that Circe does, and she breaks open an egg, and it's like it's like a single clause in that entire book. She breaks open the egg, but it was collected too late, and there's a partially developed chick in the egg. And that image, that one little thing, this has stuck with me ever since I read that book. And I thought that there's the strength of this one image that makes you recoil. And even as a reader, I recoiled. I was like, oh, if I could do that if I could have a sentence like that in one of my stories once, I would be a happy camper. I've done it. I've achieved my achievement.
Yeah. He's really good at like you were saying, that Chekhov's gun, like placing little things to signal big things later. So like like for her big story is her children. So that's such a like a perfectly delicately placed detail.
Perfect, right?
Yeah, that's really good. I don't remember that, but it's been a while since I read it. I read it when it came out, so it's been 10 years.
That really stuck out with me. Yeah. Funny, eh?
I think that's something you did really well in your story, though. You really peppered your details in slowly, and like the idea of these singers really came out slowly. You just have a line here and there every few paragraphs, kind of signaling what's coming, which I liked. Yeah.
Yeah, it's probably I'm sort of a seat of the pants kind of a writer. So I would have approached that, like I would have seriously started with that image of those scientists lying on the ice in Antarctica, and then started off, well, it's what next, right? Okay, what is it? And then I'm feeling out the story as I write it. So probably the details are in there because I was going, oh, man, maybe they do this, or oh, maybe they do that. Yeah.
Aliza, have you read this story before?
I haven't read this one before. It was my first time, but I agree. Like the pacing was really good. That it's like such a simple concept. There's a creature who sings, but I think we were like the readers allowed to kind of have that suspense or that curiosity along with Solly, which I think it really brings like such a simple idea to life for me.
I like how stories start with just small little germs, like somebody, or you hear a word or a line from a song, and my husband, he's been with me long enough, he recognizes it. I'll get that look in my eyes, and we're sitting together and he's talking to me, and then suddenly he realizes I've stopped listening, and he says, oh, okay, I can see it. And I say, yeah, I know there's a story coming. And I don't know, does it feel this way for you, Aliza? It feels like there's something moving behind you, and you don't know what it is, and it's just this sort of formless thing, and you're like, oh, hang on a second, I need to turn around and have a look at this. But if you turn around too fast, it'll go.
Mm-hmm.
And it's that sense of something sort of moving forward. And if you're just still for a few minutes, it'll come. Or if you just start to write and not think about it much, it'll come, and it'll turn into something great through some strange alchemy.
Oh no, I think we've all had those moments. Like, sometimes I'll just be like lying on the floor in my living room, and my housemate will walk in. I'll be like, not right now. Like, I can't. I'm busy thinking.
Yeah. Well, the biggest block to my writing for years was the kids. You know, like I love them dearly, but try lying on the floor quietly with a 2-year-old. It doesn't happen. I don't think I wrote for 10 years, except for like irate letters to teachers.
Is that block now changed? Is it the chickens? Are they the new block?
No, they're very good. They know when to leave me alone. Yeah, my youngest is 15 now, so, and he's very creative, and he's doing his own stuff, and they know, like, they've been with me long enough that if I'm in here and the fingers are on the keyboard and they're moving, or probably more likely when they're stopped, that they tiptoe past. And yeah, no, they're pretty good. But yeah, that was 10 years. I don't think I wrote anything worth. Believe it or not, I wrote fan fiction. That's what kept me going when I couldn't write my own stuff. But I needed, that feeling like if I don't write something, I'm going to explode. If I had that feeling, I would write fan fiction stories for my kids. And I won't say what because it's embarrassing, but at the time it was my lifeline. No, those are papers I'm going to burn before I die.
I feel like it's like when you don't write, it's just something feels off. Like you feel off.
Yeah.
In your life. Yeah. It's not even necessarily that writing feels great. It's just that it feels worse not to do it. I think.
It often feels horrible.
Yeah.
Especially when you're editing.
Yeah. Yeah. But it just feels worse not to do it. That's all. It's a curse. It's a little bit of a curse.
Mm-hmm.
You either feel bad or worse.
Yeah.
That's writing.
Well, I was lucky enough that I found other creative outlets that give me that, I call it flow, like that sense when everything's working and the words are coming out, and especially when you're writing something new, that delightful feeling of flow and being at one with everything. There are other things that I do that give me that same feeling. Gardening, believe it or not, is one of them. And drawing. My drawings are horrible, but it gives me that same rush of creativity, but nothing like writing. Like, yeah. I come back to the writing and I think, what was I doing in the garden? I'm an idiot. I should have been here, not in the sun getting fresh air. I should have been here in the house getting backache.
Yeah, there's just those little moments. They're rare, but they're worth it, I think.
Yeah.
Where you feel fully invested in what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
Flow, I think, is the right word. I think that's the actual scientific word.
Oh, excellent.
Yeah.
And here I was thinking I'd invented something grand. It's probably just something I read and forgot about.
Well, there's been a lot of studies because that's like anything you're trying to do, the state you kind of want to be in, where you're not overthinking anything. You're just like intuitively doing it, and you're in the moment.
Yeah, and it feels like there's no barrier between.
Yeah.
But there's no barrier between you and the story, and that the fact that your hands are on a keyboard, like what hands, what keyboard, you don't even think about it. Yeah.
It's just playing in your head, and you're going along.
And then writer's block is when suddenly you realize that you've got hands and a keyboard and a computer, and that's what writer's block is. You look at yourself and you go, "What the heck is all this stuff?"
Yeah.
And you don't know what to do with it.
Well, Aliza, was there anything else you want to add, or should we do our 10 questions?
I think Jessica's answered all my questions. What about you?
Yeah, I think we can go into 10 questions. We're an hour and 5 minutes right now.
Okay. So, Jessica, we just have some 10 rapid fire questions for you to answer. So, do you want to start?
I've got a midterm exam on Tuesday. I don't know if I'm up for rapid fire questions.
You've actually answered, I think, 2 of them already throughout the conversation. But yeah, what time of day do you usually write?
Whenever I find the time. I have time of day.
What's your daily writing goal?
To write. I used to try to set a word goal, but I never got there, and I was horrifying. So I stopped. I just try to write every day, even if it's 10 words or 1,000 words. I don't care.
Do you? And this is not a question, but this is just a random question now. Do you track them at all when you were trying to write, or did you write them anywhere?
I used to track down I have a what I call my accountability journal.
Yeah.
I do actually keep that. Like I do write down every day what I do, but that's more so that the next day I can go back and remind myself of what I did. And I used to keep track of the words, but it just got too stressful because it occurred to me that writing to a word count was I just used the word "and" 500 times.
Right.
So I just stopped doing that.
One thing I really like to do, if you're just trying to write every day, like you're just trying to get something down, is write your word count down, but don't worry about the number. Like, don't worry about how high it is, or write a 0. And you'll find you'll really not want to write that 0. You'll be okay with even just writing 50 words. Right?
But for me, sometimes writing might not actually be putting down new words. It might be I spent an hour editing something that needed to be editing, or I was doing research, or I spent, honestly, with Aliza, 20 minutes on the floor daydreaming because I'm trying to come up with a new story, and you need that moment of stillness. Although I'm not on the floor as much as I used to be. Comfy chair these days.
What I would do for that, or what I do is I do $7.50 per hour of work.
Yeah.
If I'm not putting words to paper. But yeah, what's your writing space look like? Are we in it right now?
We are in it right now. It's actually, the space that's behind me is matched by the space in front of me. It's not a very big room. We actually carved it out of my son's bedroom. He had a big bedroom, and we decided he didn't need that much space because he's little. And so it sort of sits off the hallway upstairs. So I don't have a door, which is kind of good and bad. But no, I love it up here. It's very crowded because everything that I do is up here, and I do a lot of art, and I do a lot of writing, and cameras and old typewriters, and I do. It's a disaster. I love it. It's perfect.
When did you start taking writing seriously?
When I was 6, 8, maybe. No, grade 6. Yeah, I've always wanted to write, and I think sometimes though I took it too seriously, and that would stop me from writing because I wasn't getting the effects that I wanted to, or I got a less than glowing report from a teacher, or I had a workshop that didn't go well because nobody got what I was trying to do, and then I would stop. But I don't stop anymore.
Yeah, it's like I think that's the most powerful thing you can learn is allowing yourself to be bad. Right. That's one of like the changing moments in a writing life is just it's okay to suck.
Yeah, and we all suck all the time. Like every first draft sucks.
Yeah.
And it should suck. I would love to say that I'm one of those people. Oh yeah, I write one draft and that's it. It's done. No, I write 12, 14, 15 drafts and it still sucks. But every first draft sucks, and you have to give yourself permission to suck. And then you also have to be professional enough to recognize that it sucks and that it needs work to get better. And that's all part of the process.
Oh yeah. A tough process, but it is.
Yeah, and I think, we read J.R.R. Martin, or we read Stephen King, or we read Sherry Tepper, or, N.K. Jemisin. And their work is so good. But it wasn't that when they first sat down, on their back deck with a cup of tea and a notebook in front of them. That's not what it was. It became that because they put a lot of work into it.
You know what I just thought of? It's very similar to social media. You see these fake lives, right? You don't see all the grime underneath. You only see the pristine. And so you get confused about what people's lives are like.
Yeah. There's no way they're that thin and eating that much chocolate cake. It can't be real.
The next few questions you already answered. It was the first book do you remember getting into? And you said Lord of the Rings. And do you need an outline, or do you write by seat of your pants? And you said seat of your pants. So we'll do what are you reading right now?
I'm reading a boating magazine. I just finished reading The Rise and Fall of Dodo by Neil Stevenson and Nicole, I want to say Gardner, but I should have written that down. Anyway, it's called The Rise and Fall of Dodo. And
science fiction?
Yeah.
Because Neil Stevenson is a pretty famous science fiction writer, right?
Yeah, well, that's why I picked it up. And he's written with another woman, and Nicole's her first name, and it starts with G, and I want to say Gardner, but I'm guessing. I enjoyed it. It was fun. It's sort of written kind of like a memoir, but it's got memos in it and emails and text conversations. I just finished that yesterday, so I haven't yet had the courage to pick up at the next novel. It takes me a couple of days to get out of a book.
Yeah, The Rise and Fall. That's it. That's what it's called, with Nicole Galland.
Oh,
Close.
Galland. Sorry, Nicole. Galland.
Gardner is John Gardner, famous writer.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of Gardners, but yeah. I had the G right. Sorry, Nicole. Yes, I'm sure she's listening to me. I'm very worried about what I think.
So what's a book on writing you'd recommend?
Okay, so if you write science fiction and fantasy, I've got it here. Where is it?
Yeah, let's see it.
Okay, so I've got it's called Wonder Book: The Illustrated Guide to Creating Imaginative Fiction. And I picked it. It's by Jeff Vandermeer. And I picked it up because it said it was specifically for people who write science fiction and fantasy. I've really, really, really enjoyed it. It's full of tabs, and I've scribbled all over the pages and taken notes. I really quite like that. And the other books I like, and it's not a sort of a how-to book, but the one I have is the Negative Trait Thesaurus. And it's a series of books by Angela Ackerman and Becca Puglisi, and it's a writer's guide to character flaws, a writer's guide to urban spaces, a writer's guide to rural spaces, and it's a really good sort of quick reference if you find yourself in a jam. Like if you've got a character who's really, really scared, how the heck do you say that person's really scared without saying they were really scared? And their series of books, I think the group is called Writers Helping Writers. Their series of books is really good for sort of picking up and getting a whole list of, here's a whole bunch of words to say scared without saying scared. And as a resource, I find them really, really handy. I've got a couple of them.
Yeah, I like that. I had before I had this really big infographic, and I'll find it and I'll post it in the comments here. But I had this really, really big infographic that was like any feeling or emotion, and then a bunch of different ways to describe it. Yeah. Without saying it, like physical actions.
Yeah, and these books, they go into also, if you are feeling this way, like if someone's feeling particularly frightened, here are some physical traits they might exhibit. Here's how they're going to feel internally. Here are some possible causes, and here are short-term effects, long-term effects of prolonged fear, for example. And they'll go through all of those. And yeah, I mean, I could research that stuff on my own, but they've done it for me, and I'm more than happy to pay them for their books. And I've got a couple of them on the shelf, and I've got them digitally as well. I've got them on my Kindle. I actually prefer having them as a hard copy though, because it's easier to flip through than to have to, ebook and pull up my account. And
Is it my question, Aliza?
Yeah.
What's one piece of fiction you always return to?
The Foreigner Universe, C.J. Cherry. I think that's how you pronounce it. I love her books, and she's on like book like 16 or 17 of that series, and I can read them over and over and over again. I love her stuff. I've read everything.
I've never heard of her.
Well, I think I've read everything that she's written.
And the last question, what's something about writing that's been on your mind lately?
Why do I get like 80% of a novel done and everyone's saying, finish it, finish it, finish it? And I'm like, yeah, no, I think I'm good.
Finish it, Jessica.
I know. It's on I'll have it done this year. It's September. It'll be finished by September. It was supposed to be finished by last September, but no.
There's like a quote about that, about some like right before you finish, the desire to quit will be greatest right before you're done.
Oh, I've got like maybe 3 chapters to write to finish it, and I've got to do some reorganizing. It's so close to being done. I can taste it, but I'm not. I think I'm just afraid of messing it up, and I find that last 20% to finish the novel is like straight uphill. It's exhausting. So I start all the other projects instead.
I did a presentation on how to like build a writing craft.
Yeah.
So I was talking about like putting off writing and like the procrastination, and like the science behind procrastination is all about anxiety to fail. So exactly how you put it, you're worried you're not going to live up to what your expectations are. So to get rid of it is like we were saying before, is allowing yourself to suck.
Yeah, and it's also that resistance. Oh gosh, I'm wearing the wrong glasses. Oh, Stephen Pressfield's book, the War of Art.
Yeah,
and he talks about resistance, and I've read those books. Those are other books I go back to again and again because oh man, he's right. And when I get to that, like this novel, I'm so close to being done, and the resistance is very hard with this one. It's but I just have to power through because I watched a really good podcast in January. They were talking about the writing goals for January. It was done through Ally, which is the Alliance of Independent Authors. And the best line that came out of that was finish what you start and publish what you finish. So like it's on the wall behind the computer now. Finish what you start and publish what you finish. So, okay, I will finish it. I don't want to, but I'll finish it. Well, I do. I've got another idea. I want to work on to the next project. So I have to finish this one first.
All right. Well, speaking of finishing, I think that's it. Thank you so much, Jessica.
No, thanks,
Jessica.
Much. Yeah, Ian, it was nice to meet you. Liza, I'll see you Monday.
Tomorrow.